Stop for a moment and put down those scissors. What if I told you that you are literally cutting away half of your future tomato harvest? Many of us have been conditioned to think that every single lateral shoot of the plant is an enemy to be ruthlessly eliminated. Welcome. Today we will talk about one of the most debated practices among vegetable garden enthusiasts, tomato pruning. I promise you that by the end of this video, you will look at your plants with completely different eyes. You will discover which is the single, incredibly precious branch that you must never, ever remove. Let's start right away by debunking a major myth. Not all lateral branches are energy-stealing parasites. Some are the key to achieving a yield that will be the envy of all your neighbors. Are you ready to discover the truth that many gardening manuals omit? I bet many of you have always removed everything without a second thought. Let me know in the comments if you too have been victims of the extreme pruning myth. To truly understand what we are doing, we need to take a small step back and look at the very nature of the tomato. Originally from South America, the wild tomato did not grow at all like a single, neat little tree tied to a wooden stake. On the contrary, it behaved like a creeping, messy vine that spread across the ground in every direction. When humans began cultivating it to maximize production in confined spaces, the need to control its shape arose. Thus, the technique of suckering, or the removal of axillary shoots, was invented. These shoots, commonly called suckers or wolves in some traditions, are new small stems that sprout exactly in the angle between the main stem and a leaf. The basic principle was simple. By removing these secondary branches, the plant concentrates all its vital energy on growing taller and plumping up the fruit on the main trunk. But over the years, this practice has turned into a rigid dogma. We have forgotten that modern plants, especially indeterminate varieties, have immense vigor. They are perfect machines for producing solar energy, and limiting them to a single stem sometimes means wasting incredible genetic potential. Let's dive into the anatomy of our tomato plant. Imagine looking at the main stem going upwards. At a certain point, you will notice a horizontal branch sprouting from the stem, which is simply a compound leaf. Look closely at the 45-degree angle formed between the main stem and this leaf. Right there, in that axle, a new little shoot is born. That is the famous sucker. If you let it grow, it will become a thick, sturdy branch that will produce leaves, flowers, and eventually more tomatoes. The problem is that if you let all the suckers the plant produces grow, you will soon end up with an impenetrable jungle. The plant will waste a ton of energy creating leaves. Air will no longer circulate between the branches, and fungal diseases will have free rein. Not to mention the tomatoes, which will become tiny because the nutritional resources will be divided across too many fronts. That is why the general rule says to remove them. But pay attention, because here comes the crucial point. There is a vital exception to this rule. Not all suckers are created equal. One of them possesses extraordinary strength, a hormonal drive that makes it almost a twin of the main stem, and that is exactly the one we must learn to recognize and preserve. Here is the secret that will change your garden. The most common mistake is cutting the sucker located immediately below the first cluster of flowers. Write this information down because it is fundamental. Observe your plant as it grows. At a certain point, it will produce its very first cluster of yellow flowers. Now look exactly below that cluster. In the axil of the leaf just below it, you will see a sucker sprouting. Do not touch it for any reason in the world. That exact lateral shoot is the strongest and most vigorous on the entire plant. Nature programmed it to receive a massive dose of nutrients precisely because it is located right next to the main reproductive area. If you want to experience doubling your harvest, this is the shoot you must let grow to transform your plant from a single stem to two main stems. Imagine having a fork, a sort of giant Y shape. This approach is called 2-liter cultivation by professionals, and it is no coincidence that the best farms use exactly this strategy to maximize yield per square meter. By debunking the myth that dictates cutting everything, we give the plant the opportunity to express its maximum productive potential. But why that specific sucker under the first cluster and not another? The answer lies in the circulation of sap and plant hormones. The tomato plant directs enormous amounts of sugars and water towards the upper part where the first fruits are forming. The sucker located immediately below this high-traffic zone, so to speak, benefits from direct access to these resources. It will grow at an impressive speed, almost matching the thickness of the main stem in no time. If instead you chose to save a sucker born much lower down, near the soil, you would get a weak branch. That low branch would struggle to reach the light, remain in the shade of the upper leaves, and worse still, its fruits would end up touching the damp ground, rotting quickly. Saving the right branch means creating a balanced and strong Y structure. Both branches will have access to the same amount of sunlight, and air will be able to circulate freely between them. This is the true perfect architecture for a healthy and incredibly productive tomato plant. At this point, many wonder if this technique is suitable for all types of tomatoes. It is an excellent question and brings us to a vital distinction. There are primarily two categories of tomatoes: determinate and indeterminate. Determinate tomatoes, also called bush tomatoes, have a genetic code that tells them to grow to a certain height, produce all their fruit at once, and then stop. With these varieties, suckering should be kept to a minimum or avoided altogether. Otherwise, you will remove the fruit-bearing branches, wiping out your harvest. Conversely, indeterminate tomatoes are those that grow upwards indefinitely, like true vines. They can reach 6 to 10 feet, 2 or 3 meters, in height if we don't stop them. It is precisely on these continuously growing varieties, such as Oxhearts, San Marzanos, or classic cherry tomatoes on the vine, that the two-stem technique works magic. By doubling the main stems, we double the points where future clusters will be born, fully exploiting the unstoppable nature of these wonderful plants. Now that we have identified which sucker to save, what do we do with all the others? Here we must be ruthless. Every other shoot that sprouts in the leaf axils, whether on the main stem or on our new second stem, must be removed. This is the maintenance work you will have to do consistently. The golden rule is to intervene when the suckers are still very small. Ideally, remove them when they are between 1 and 2 inches, 3 to 5 centimeters long. At this stage, they are so tender that you can simply pinch them off with your fingers. Just grasp the small shoot between your thumb and index finger and bend it sideways with a sharp, decisive motion. You will feel a slight snap, and the shoot will come off cleanly, leaving a tiny wound on the stem. This small scar will dry and heal in a few hours. Removing the branches when they are this small means the plant hasn't yet wasted precious energy growing them, energy that will be immediately redirected to the flowers and fruits we are trying to ripen. But what happens if you forgot to check the garden for a couple of weeks and find yourself facing suckers that are 6 to 8 inches, 15 or 20 centimeters long? Don't panic, it happens to everyone. But in this case, you cannot use your fingers. A shoot this large has become fibrous and woody at the base. If you tried to tear it off by hand, you would risk stripping the bark off the main stem. By pulling the skin of the stem, you would create a long open wound, a literal gateway for pathogenic bacteria and fungi that could sicken or kill the entire plant. In these situations, it is absolutely necessary to use a cutting tool. Pruning shears or a sharp little knife are ideal. The important thing is to make a clean, sharp cut as close to the main stem as possible without actually cutting into it. To give a practical example, imagine a surgical operation. Precision is everything. This way, you will minimize the exposed area of the wound and help the plant heal quickly, safeguarding the health of its entire vascular system. But there is a detail almost no one tells you when it comes to using tools: disinfection. Using shears from one plant to another without disinfecting them is the fastest way to spread diseases throughout the garden. Tomatoes are particularly susceptible to viruses and fungal infections. If the first plant you prune is secretly sick, your shears will become the vehicle of contagion for all the others. How can we avoid this invisible disaster? It's very simple. Always keep a small spray bottle filled with rubbing alcohol or a bleach and water solution handy. Between one plant and the next, spray the blades of your shears generously and wipe them dry with a clean cloth. It will only take 5 seconds, but this simple habit will save your harvest from catastrophic epidemics. Many novice gardeners see their plants wither in August and blame the heat. Often, the real cause was pruning done with dirty tools in June. Prevention is your best weapon. Even the time of day you decide to operate makes a huge difference. The perfect time to prune and remove suckers from tomatoes is early in the morning on a beautiful sunny day. Why? Because right at this time, during the early morning hours, the plants are turgid, full of water, and the suckers are crisp and snap off much more easily with a clean break. But the real magic is done by the sun. The sun's rays and the heat of the day will quickly dry the sap oozing from the small wounds. Ultraviolet rays act as a natural disinfectant, creating a dry scar before evening arrives. We must at all costs avoid pruning in the late afternoon or towards evening. As temperatures drop, evening humidity and dew would settle on the still fresh, open wounds. And moisture on a fresh cut is the ideal environment for the development of the dreaded late blight, the worst fungal disease for tomatoes. Work in harmony with the sun, and your plants will thank you by staying strong and healthy. Growing tomatoes with two stems also means you will have to manage double the weight. A single cluster of ripe tomatoes can weigh a pound, half a kilo, or more. Multiply this weight by the numerous clusters that will grow on two main branches, and you will immediately understand that the support structure becomes an absolute priority. You can no longer rely on a thin little stick. You will need smart trellising. Imagine the Y shape we created. The ideal approach is to provide each of the two stems with its own dedicated support. If you are using bamboo canes, plant two in a teepee shape near the base, spreading them slightly outward at the top, and tie one stem to each cane. If you are growing in a greenhouse, you can drop two strings from the roof, twisting each stem around its own string as it grows. This way, the branches won't clash with each other, and there will be no risk of the weight snapping them in half under the force of the summer wind. It is a true agricultural engineering project. Tying tomatoes seems like a trivial gesture, but it hides very dangerous pitfalls. We must remember that the tomato stem grows in thickness as the weeks go by. If you use a thin plastic string or wire and tie it too tightly around the branch, a strangulation effect will occur. As it grows, the stem will be cut into by the rigid wire. This will block the flow of sap to the top of the plant and, in the worst-case scenario, decapitate the branch. The secret is to use soft, elastic materials. Strips of old cotton fabric, perhaps cut from an old t-shirt, are perfect. Or specialized agricultural raffia twine. When you tie the knot, use the figure-8 knot technique. Pass the twine behind the support stake, then cross it between the stake and the plant stem before tying it. This will create a soft cushion that will hold the plant steady without ever touching or squeezing it directly. Always leave some empty space, a little slack in the knot to allow the stem to expand naturally as it thickens. Having two productive stems instead of one means your plant will literally be working at double the speed, and like any revving engine, it will need more fuel. Maintaining moisture and nutrients in the soil becomes a critical factor for the success of this technique. A pruned two-stem plant will consume much more water than a plant left to a single stem. This doesn't mean you have to flood the field every day. It means irrigation must be deep and regular. To help you in this endeavor, there is a phenomenal trick. Mulching. Cover the soil around the base of the plants with a 4-inch on 10-centimeter thick layer of dry straw, dry leaves, or wood chips. This protective layer will act as a shield against the scorching sun, prevent water from evaporating, keep the roots cool, and stop weeds from stealing nutrients. Without good mulch, in the middle of summer, the plant could become stressed and drop its flowers before the little tomatoes even form, and we don't want to lose a single potential fruit. Speaking of fuel, water alone is not enough. We need nutrients, particularly potassium and phosphorus, which are the fundamental elements for flower development and fruit sweetness. Many people make the mistake of using fertilizers that are too rich in nitrogen, such as fresh manure or unbalanced chemical fertilizers. Nitrogen is great for growing leaves and is useful at the beginning of the season. But if we give too much when the plant is already large and has too vigorous stems, we will get a forest of very green leaves without even the shadow of a tomato. It is the typical case of a beautiful but sterile plant. We need to switch to feeding it specifically. An excellent natural solution is comfrey tea or the addition of wood ash, which is extremely rich in potassium. When the first little tomatoes are the size of a walnut, start feeding the soil sparingly but consistently. Imagine having to feed 2 mouths instead of 1. The plant will respond by plumping up the fruits visibly on both main branches. There is an additional incredible advantage to growing with 2 stems. and it is related to sunlight management. Tomato leaves are incredibly efficient solar panels, but if the leaves are overlapping in a chaotic tangle, the ones underneath will remain in the shade, stop producing energy, and become just dead weight for the plant, yellowing and attracting diseases. By structuring the plant in a Y shape and tying the two stems apart, we create a sort of empty central corridor. This open space allows the sun's rays to penetrate deeply into the heart of the plant, hitting almost all the leaves evenly. Tomatoes love the sun, but the fruits themselves do not need direct light to ripen. What matters is that the leaves receive light to transform it into sugars that will make the tomatoes incredibly sweet. Optimized sun exposure, thanks to the double scaffolding, translates directly into a higher quality harvest in terms of flavor and aroma. However, even with the two stems well separated, at a certain point, the lower part of the plant will tend to become too dense. As the lower clusters ripen and are harvested, the lowest leaves, those close to the ground, begin to yellow and show dry spots. Their life cycle is over. Furthermore, being so close to the damp earth, they risk getting infected by mud splashes during heavy summer thunderstorms. This is where another pruning phase comes into play, known as basal leaf removal. The idea is to progressively eliminate all the leaves from the ground up to the level of the first cluster of tomatoes still ripening. This operation leaves the first 12 to 16 inches, 30 or 40 centimeters, of the stems completely bare. Besides improving aesthetics, it creates an air tunnel under the plants. The wind can pass freely at ground level, quickly drying out excess moisture. This simple gesture is perhaps the most powerful and economical defense that exists against mold and fungi. Keep the plant's feet dry and aerated, and you will avoid half of your problems. But there is an emergency trick related to lateral shoots that few know about and that can save your entire season. What happens if, during a violent thunderstorm or a sudden hailstorm, the main stem of your plant snaps in half? Or worse still, if by mistake, while pruning or tying, you cut off the growing tip, the apex of the stem. Without the tip, that branch will no longer be able to grow taller and will stop forming new clusters, a true catastrophe. But nature has provided a formidable backup plan. You simply need to immediately stop removing the suckers on that broken stem. Wait a few days, and you will see a robust new lateral shoot sprout in the axil of the highest remaining leaf. Let it grow. In just a few weeks, that sucker will take on the role of the main stem. It will grow straight up, replacing the part you lost. It is as if the plant has a spare tire always ready for use. Knowing this biological reaction will save you from uprooting damaged plants that can very well regenerate themselves. As summer progresses and we approach the end of August or the beginning of September, depending on the region you are in, the days begin to shorten and the nights become cool. The indeterminate tomato plant, true to its nature, will continue to produce new flowers and try to grow upwards on its two mighty stems. But there is an insurmountable timing problem. A tomato flower takes an average of 40 to 50 days to turn into a ripe fruit. The flowers that sprout in September will never have the time and heat necessary to ripen before the arrival of the autumn frost. If we let them be, the plant will waste its last precious energy producing green marbles that we will never eat. The time has come for topping, the final operation to optimize the harvest on our two stems. Imagine telling the plant that the time for expansion is over. Now we move on to the final concentration of resources. The topping technique is dramatic but incredibly effective. Take your disinfected shears and look at the top of your two stems. Find the last cluster of flowers or newly formed little tomatoes. Count 2 whole leaves above that cluster. Then snip, cleanly cut off the growing tip of both stems. You are literally cutting off the head of the plant. No more upward growth, no more new branches. This controlled amputation sends a very powerful hormonal signal to the whole plant. From that moment on, every single drop of sap, every ounce of sugar and water extracted from the roots will be pumped exclusively toward the tomatoes that are already present on the branches. The result? Those that seem destined to remain small green tomatoes will plump up rapidly and turn red at an impressive speed. It is the professional's secret to ripening 100% of the harvest before winter arrives. 2 top stems will give you a spectacular final explosion of a harvest. There is a widespread myth among weekend gardeners. Many believe that leaving too many leaves or branches slows down the ripening of the red tomato. Consequently, they start ripping off healthy green leaves at random, leaving the stems almost completely bare under the scorching sun. This is a catastrophic mistake. Tomatoes do not ripen because they are directly hit by the sun's rays. On the contrary, the thin skin of the fruit exposed to the scorching UV rays at 2 in the afternoon can get severely sunburned. These sunburns form white wrinkled spots on the tomatoes, ruining them irreparably. Tomatoes ripen thanks to ethylene gas, a hormone produced by the plant itself, and environmental heat. Healthy leaves serve as a protective umbrella. They create the perfect shade that keeps the fruits at an ideal temperature without burning them. While they continue to pump sugars through photosynthesis, remove only the diseased, yellowed, or basal leaves, but always leave a roof of green leaves to protect your precious hanging fruits. Nature put those leaves there for a specific reason. Let's now look at the differences between growing two-stem tomatoes in an open field versus growing them inside a greenhouse. The environment radically changes the rules of the game. In a greenhouse, the humidity is much higher, the temperature is constant, and there is no wind. Without wind, the pollination of flowers becomes more difficult because pollen does not blow from one flower to another, but the two-stem plant, having twice as many flowers close together, statistically increases the chances of success. However, the lack of ventilation in a greenhouse makes it vital to be even stricter with lateral suckering. Every excess shoot must disappear. Otherwise, the stagnant air will create condensation on the leaves in a matter of hours, inviting disastrous diseases. Outdoors, on the other hand, the plant has to face the elements, driving rain and strong winds. Here, the two-stem structure, securely tied to sturdy supports, helps to disperse the force of the wind. The plant is more balanced, less like a rigid flagpole, and more like a taut sail. Adapting this technique to your specific microclimate will make you an unbeatable gardener. At the end of the journey, choosing not to remove the first sucker under the cluster is not just a gardening trick. It is a profound shift in mindset. It means stopping the fight against the plant's exuberant nature and starting to collaborate with it. A single indeterminate tomato plant, guided into two stems, properly fertilized and carefully tied, can produce 30 to 45 pounds, 15 to 20 kilos, of perfect fruit in a single season. We are talking about a monstrous yield compared to the poor, stunted, single-stem plants seen in so many gardens. Sure, it will require more attention on your part. You will have to go out to the garden every 3 or 4 days, check for new shoots, adjust the raffia ties, and make sure there is enough water. But I assure you that the satisfaction of seeing two mighty columns of dark leaves, loaded with dozens and dozens of shiny red tomatoes, will repay every drop of sweat. The vegetable garden is a teacher of life. It teaches us that overly rigid rules must be broken when the goal is abundance. We have reached the real turning point. Think about how much work is saved, paradoxically, and how much is gained. Letting that specific sucker under the first flower cluster grow transforms a normal plant into a production champion. You have learned not only which branch to cut, but above all which one to jealously save. The importance of always disinfecting your tools, and the secrets of tying so as not to strangle the stems. These small, powerful details are what separate a mediocre harvest from a crate overflowing with incredibly sweet tomatoes. The magic of having two vigorous stems working for you is now in your hands. If you apply this technique, get ready to have to give tomatoes away to the whole neighborhood because you won't know where to put them anymore. If this guide has changed the way you see the hidden secrets in your garden, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss upcoming tips. We are bringing back to light the ancient wisdom of the earth that many have tried to forget. Grow your future with us. Nature's next treasure will be revealed very soon. Leave a like to support our work, and happy growing to everyone.